Hope you're having an amazing one, Wrestlezona family, whenever you happen to be tuning in. My name is Lance Reese, your definitive host for the hour. I've been a fan of professional wrestling since I was about 6 years old, begging my parents to buy me action figures ever since I saw videos of Jeff Hardy's Swanton bombing on YouTube. We got another packed episode for you today as we here on episode 8 of Wrestlezona on 88.7 The Pulse. We'll cover what's happening in the world of WWE, All Elite Wrestling, the Indies, and even wrestling here local in the Valley. Stay tuned to hear which free agent made their debut in WWE's NXT, upcoming shows here in Arizona, and more all coming up. We have some exciting segments coming up this hour, such as our 10-bell history. We have an exclusive interview with retired Green Beret, Roman Rozell. Hopping into the world of WWE, we have a fresh debut on NXT from the man who might formerly be known as Ricky Starks, may still be Ricky Starks. It is quite unsure. Via wrestling headlines, there is backstage debacle against Ricky Starks' name and during his NXT debut this past February 11th. The website says, Ricky Starks has officially arrived in WWE, though the company has yet to refer to him by name on television. Starks made his WWE TV debut on the February 11th episode of NXT, but his name was noticeably absent from the broadcast. It was reported that the deal came together quickly but is finalized. Starks is now part of the WWE roster. Internally, WWE is listing and referring to him as Ricky Starks, but they chose not to use his name on screen. A WWE source has confirmed that the company often negotiates sync agreements, allowing them to use a performer's name and trademarks while they are under contract. Given how fast the deal was finalized, it's believed that WWE is exercising caution as those details are ironed out. ECW legend Tommy Dreamer had something to say about it, being quoted on his podcast to say, "Happy to see him show up the way he did. Loved it. Through the fans. Give that kid a microphone because he's very charismatic on the mic. He did his stuff that kinda got him to the dance, got him over with his fan base." Dreamer noticed that the Performance Center crowd was well aware of who Starks was, and nobody saw it coming. It wasn't leaked, he said. A multitude of WWE superstars were released from the company, including a Hall of Famer. These superstars happen to be Cedric Alexander, Sonya Deville, Blair Davenport, and the authors of Pain. WWE Hall of Famer Paul Ellering was also listed in these reports. Also released was Isla Dawn, Giovanni Vinci, formerly of Imperium, Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson of the OC, and then Elektra Lopez was released as well. Announced so far for the upcoming Elimination Chamber event in the men's match is John Cena, CM Punk, Logan Paul, and Drew McIntyre, whereas in the women's Elimination Chamber match announced so far is Alexa Bliss, Bayley, Bianca Belair, and Liv Morgan. What other two men and women will join them in the chamber match, we will find out in the following weeks to come. What an eventful week for WWE. I'm Lance Reese with Wrestlezona on 88.7 The Pulse. Now let's recap AEW's week. Hopping into some news in All Elite Wrestling, it has been made apparent that Malachi Black is no longer on the AEW roster as he's been removed from the official page of AEW. This might also be Miro, who is following him as he has also been removed from AEW's roster page. Of course, we talked about Ricky Starks earlier, who made his appearance in NXT, the former AEW star. It's also looking likely for a departure from Rey Fenix, who might be in negotiations right now with AEW for his release. Interesting story here from Cage Side Seats saying former WWE ref Rita Chatterton, who says she was under contract with AEW for a year and did absolutely nothing. In the 1980s, Rita Chatterton became the first female referee to ever work in Vince McMahon's WWF. Later on, she would accuse Vince McMahon of horrid things, which has become quite apparent over the past few years, but she would not return to the wrestling business until the 2020s. In 2021, she agreed to do an event for her friend Seth Turner, who is the president of the International Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. During an interview on Power and Glory, the podcast, Rita tells a bizarre story about how this appearance quickly led to her being under contract with AEW president Tony Khan. When Rita was asked about what she did when she was under contract with Tony Khan, she laughed while admitting that she didn't do anything. AEW Collision and Dynamite tapings are coming up in Phoenix, and I am going to that, and I am looking very forward. You will hear my interpretations and thoughts on the event on this upcoming episode 9 of Wrestlezona next Sunday. But so far announced have been a trios match for the Dynamite episode of the Ops versus the Patriarchy. And also on that episode of Dynamite, MJF and Hangman Adam Page are going to go face to face. Not much more has been announced for the event, but I also see that Mercedes Moné, the former Sasha Banks, will be there, and so will Jon Moxley, which is pretty cool. That's a wrap on our All Elite update. I'm Lance Reese with WrestleZona on 88.7 The Pulse. Let's get into some upcoming Arizona and Indie news. We are a weekend away from IZW's monster event at Bullshooters in Phoenix. The IZW Women's Championship will be on the line as Brian Thorne takes on Alice Blair. The IZW Heavyweight Championship will be on the line as main event Evan Daniels defends his title against Parada and Can't Stop Jamal. Also announced for the card, Frankie Kazarian versus the Navajo Warrior, Martin Cassius versus EJ Sparks, Morgan and Savannah Thorne versus Noelle in Paradise, and Jacob East versus Ray Rosas. This is pretty exciting, but Game Changer Wrestling, when they return to Mesa in March 2nd, Zack Sabre Jr. will be there. And boy, will I be there too. Who Zack Sabre Jr. will be facing is a mystery right now, but man, am I excited for that. Replacing Brian Cage at Arizona Wrestling Federation's Triumph at Bullshooters on March 1st will be Chris Adonis, taking place the former WWE Chris Masters, who once put me in the Master Lock. That was actually at a Cactus League Wrestling show, and I want to take a moment now to use my platform to talk about Cactus League Wrestling. I have no clue what happened to Cactus League Wrestling. I know it went out of business during the pandemic. It was local, based out of Tucson. I used to go to the shows in Tucson. Me and a family friend would drive 2 hours to the event and saw Killer Cross before he was carrying Cross in WWE. Saw Mick Foley, got his autograph. Met Tessa Blanchard. Good thing the spirit of indie shows are still alive. That puts an end to our news section of the show. We have an interview with former pro wrestler and retired Green Beret, Roman Rozell, coming up. Let's get into our 10 Bell history. 10 Bell history. 1. DDP drove the Honky Tonk Man's pink Cadillac at WrestleMania 6. 2. Bret Hart, Chris Benoit, and King Booker are the only Triple Crown champions in WCW and WWE. 3. Christian is the only wrestler to win a championship in 3 consecutive WrestleManias, that being WrestleMania 2000, 17, and 18. 4. When Edge first signed with WWE, his development deal saw him get just $210 a week. 5. Hulk Hogan and Sting have been in the ring together at WrestleMania, Starrcade, and Bound for Glory. 6. Randy Orton once used This Fire Burns as his theme song on an episode of SmackDown, the theme that is commonly associated with CM Punk and his earlier WWE run. 7. Steve Austin was rushed to the hospital the day before WrestleMania 19 took place. 8. CM Punk was on Bozo the Clown when he was 8 years old. 9. Ironically enough, Paul Bearer worked at a morgue before getting into the wrestling industry. 10. Stephanie McMahon was the first ever woman to pin The Rock. That wraps up our 10 Bell history. How is everyone's weekend so far? Any good wrestling shows you've been to? Any upcoming? Let me know on Instagram. At WrestleZona is where you can find me. We have our interview with Roman Rozell coming up. I'm Lance Reese with WrestleZona on 88.7 The Pulse. Now let's get into our interview with former pro wrestler and retired Green Beret, Roman Rozell. All right, let's get it rocking and rolling then. So I want to start this interview off by just asking simply, who are you?
Oh man, the short version, the abbreviated one.
Go for it. Whatever feels right now.
Who is Roman Rozell?
Who is Roman Rozell?
Well, I am a retired Green Beret, Sun Devil wrestler, record holder, former pro wrestler, father of 7, Arizona native.
Arizona native. You're from Apache Junction?
Yep.
If I'm correct?
Yes, sir.
What was it like growing up in AJ?
Tough.
Tough.
Yeah. But, I mean, beautiful backdrop, but I came from humble beginnings, so it was a little rough, but it kind of made me who I am today. You know, I'm definitely appreciative for everything that I have, and what I've been able to provide my family and just life in general. I love it.
So you're originally from Apache Junction, but what's your story per se? Or summarized, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, again, I became a Green Beret. You know, I started a family early. And actually, let me rewind a little bit because I have so many different like faces.
Mm-hmm.
So if you got like my high school career, then you got my college, and then you got like me being a dad, then you got me going to Iraq and Afghanistan multiple times, and you got me being a Green Beret later, then you get me coming out, and then you get me going to ASU, and then walking on there wrestling for them, and then you get me after that, you know, divorced, and then the pro wrestling, the WWE tryout, and then going to OVW, then becoming the DDP yoga guy with Dallas, and then coming back to school, and then writing a book, and still doing what I do now.
Yeah.
Summed up, you know what I mean? So.
We'll get into all that, but I want to talk more about the wrestling, pro wrestling. When did you start your training
for pro wrestling?
For pro wrestling.
Cool. I like to talk about pro wrestling. It's my favorite. December 2019, I had a WWE tryout. I was wrestling at ASU at the time. However, they don't have the same rules that they have now to where like the NIL program, the name, image, and likeness.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to vacate my eligibility. So I got to wrestle in November as like a farewell, and then because I was going to try out for the WWE. So I went in that December of 2019, had a tryout, got an email not too long later about who to contact about showing up as extras and all that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, I started training with Dan Severn. Dan the Beast Severn.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so, and we didn't have a wrestling ring or anything like that, so we were training in the Arizona State wrestling room.
Wow.
And it hurt. So by the time I mean, the wrestling rings, they hurt. But just falling on a wrestling mat like that was worse. So by the time I did fall on take bumps in the ring, I was already like, what is this? This is actually kind of giving compared to, what Dan had me doing. Like,
yeah,
it was very like prehistoric type training. Like, this is how I did it,
Other than the training, what's your relationship with Dan Severn?
Oh, he's a huge mentor still.
You still?
Yeah, we still talk.
Yeah, I had him on the show not too long ago.
Oh yeah, what'd you think of him? He's a great guy.
Great guy. Talked my ear off.
Yeah. He traveled with me a few times before I started training at the Arizona training here in Mesa with Dom and everybody. I was training in Tucson because they had a wrestling ring down there, and Dan would drive with me all the way down there just to help me out, like just an awesome guy to do that. I mean, it's the Beast. I'm like, hey, you ready to take a 3-hour trip? Because he lives over in Fountain Hills.
Mm-hmm.
So pick him up, go out there. I was like, that's how bad I wanted it, though. When I would go pick him up and then drive way out there and then come back here. And that's probably why my marriage didn't last either. I was at school all day, come home, and then we'd go train, come back. And then finally I got the opportunity to train with Dom Vitale.
Yeah.
And that kind of really gave me like a big foundation, like a good base, and I really got to hone in on the wrestling itself and what it was compared to what I was already exposed to,
Who inspired you in your early wrestling days?
You mean like as a kid? Like,
yeah, as a performer or kid. I'm familiar with your work and knowing that you've been a fan of pro wrestling since you were young, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Has that been like what's the word I'm looking for? An escape for you?
Absolutely. So growing up in AJ, like that was my escape, was pro wrestling. Just kind of broken home, and poor, stuff like that. And I think I was before my parents got divorced. I always had like the big wrestling action figures, the big rubber ones from I was born in the 80s.
Yeah.
And
the crank up Roddy Piper doll.
I did have that one. Yeah, he was like 3 feet tall.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had so that's all I knew was wrestling, and we would get to watch. When I say we, like my dad and I would watch like the pay-per-views. I don't know if they were pay-per-view back then, but I was able to watch from my memory, WrestleMania 4, 5, and that's like kind of where it sticks. And I did get to see, I remember in like 80, it's funny, I was like 3, but I still kind of remember going to the Coliseum and at least recognizing like the Hart Foundation versus the Killer Bees.
Wow.
So that's my earliest, like one of my earliest memories, like goes back that far. But Hulk Hogan was always like the ultimate for me. And then, the Ultimate Warrior, Macho Man in the 80s part of it.
Yeah.
Those were, I used to pretend I was them. So like preschool or church or wherever, if I wasn't Roman, I was either Hulk Hogan or Ultimate Warrior. You had to call me that.
Did you get a lot of your in-ring style from Ultimate Warrior?
There are some things that I took from a lot of different people, but mainly, I mean, I'm 5'9", 5'10" with boots on.
Yeah.
So I'm not like a giant like those guys were, bigger. So hitting the ropes or just kind of flexing was kind of like just paying homage, but it was just more like my intense character and just being the warrior. I would do that. And also took a little bit from Dallas, DDP.
Yeah.
Yeah, once I got into it. But all my inspirations prior to that were, for in-ring performance was always like a Kurt Angle style, Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, just cocky, arrogant, but also like hero. Like it was kind of I guess I was trying to figure out what would work for me at the time.
Yeah.
Because I had the first thing I learned getting into wrestling, they were like, you need to spend money on your gear, And Ric Flair always preached that too. That's why we always had those flamboyant robes and everything. And so I had this pretty awesome, I guess, singlet, like leggings, kind of like a Bret Hart style.
Yeah.
And I had like the Arizona flag in the front. I had like my logo on my pant legs with the Arizona State colors, had a flag, so it kind of matched who I was. But when I got to OVW, Al Snow was like, he kind of helped transform the gimmick character, but it really wasn't, because it was me. He was like, he wanted like the G.I. Joe look, the Green Beret look. And for me, I was like, anybody can buy this. I was like, I thought, like, we got to spend money on our gear and look like this. He's like, he goes, there's millions of people that wear this outfit or wear singlets. He goes, and we were on live TV in Kentucky, and also, I can't remember the other platforms at the time. This is like, 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, if someone's watching this and they just turn the channel, he goes, I want them to stop. But they just see two guys, and for the most part, in trunks, they're probably going to keep, change the channel. And Al was like, if they see like a G.I. Joe guy versus someone else, he goes, they're going to stop for a second. Then they're going to get interested because they're going to hear the commentary. They're going to look at the lights. So he was teaching like the business part more than just like who I wanted to be.
Yeah.
He's like, this is who you are. He goes, I brought you in because I like the Green Beret story.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, but I like the Arizona State story because it was more like, it was like a new identity for me at the time. And he's like, well, he goes, let's get to what's going to draw. He goes, and, if there's ever a chance, he goes, let's develop this this character who you are anyways. So you could still be, your forks up, salute, all that other stuff. He goes, I want you to come out there and kids, like, hand them, your dog tags, kind of like Bret Hart would hand the glasses. So he really helped create that character I had at the beginning.
Yeah, you have some interesting merchandise, the dog tags, like you said, and you had an action figure at one point, like a little...
Yeah, little Legos.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, the little Legos. I just bought those at the Dollar Tree and just painted them myself, and I packaged them myself, so I would buy they had like little mini Toy Story toys, I guess, and I would take them out, and then I would just paint the cardboard or put some type of paper that I'd printed out or something that had like me and my logo and the grunt style stuff.
Yeah.
Then I'd hot glue it and put my little toy in there so it looked like a regular little action figure. So I would buy like hundreds of those and just spend weekends just doing it. And then I'd have a bunch of merch at anywhere I'd go. And those were always fun for kids because they were cheap and they were cool and kind of fun.
Yeah.
Dog tags. So that's also how I kind of learned how to get the business part of it was pretty much selling your gimmicks.
And you wrestled for a number of promotions, not just here in the Southwest region, but you also wrestled for like some AEW dark matches and
Yeah, I was in OVW for a little while.
OVW, yeah,
For a good stint. And then I went to when I moved to Georgia to work for DDP. I got to work a lot of those promotions down there, everywhere from like Kentucky, Virginia, obviously Georgia, Florida. Just man, there's so many promotions out there. But it was awesome. That's what I was doing. But it was taxing, especially for my age at the time, because that's why Dallas liked me, because he started pro wrestling at age 35, and that's when I started. But it's kind of difficult when you got 7 kids you're provided for, and I was divorced at the time, so just trying to make a name for yourself, traveling and all that other stuff while still trying to be a dad.
Mm-hmm.
It was challenging, but a great experience.
You penned the book "A Dose of Inspiration," the Warrior Handbook.
Yeah.
Talk to me a bit about that and what writing that book meant to you.
So that's the second edition. I wrote the first one in 2019, and because I was going to school, because I ultimately wanted to be a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
and I had felt like everything that I'd gone through, and plus I'd been in therapy for years, and even as a Green Beret and stuff, just the stuff that we see.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been pretty resilient, and kind of learned how to challenge my thoughts and kind of make the best of situations in order to GSD, and not take my life. So I did that by little habits that I kind of cultivated. So all I did was basically graphically depict them, in a book. Like, here's a worksheet, when you're feeling this, let's talk about the issue. Let's challenge that thought. What's the alternative thought? Okay, now let's kind of, rethink the issue. Now how's your emotions? So you kind of walk through that and you're like, all right, man, I was obsessing over nothing. It kind of helps you kind of like assess it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Putting pen and paper is very powerful. And so by doing that, I just created a workbook that other people can help. The same things that I did. And it wasn't just also from the CBT, DBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy or dialectical behavior therapy. Like, those are the worksheets that I created.
Mm-hmm.
But it also had like, recipes for success, visualize, do the work, perseverance, never quit. And I kind of talk about my stories in between that and give examples of how I kind of utilize these same recipes and framework, creating vision boards and just doing anything to stay positive and stay in the fight. So I just put that in a book. And I was doing a lot of speaking engagements at the time, and that's how I initially got the book. So it meant a lot to me that people were actually, using it. And it was through Amazon, and then we just I got it published through Defiance Press, and this last November on Black Friday, and so you can get it at Barnes & Nobles or Amazon. And I love it because I spent the last year or two working on this one, like the second edition, because there was other things that I left out that I use all the time, and I'm like, I really need to add these worksheets because these are really what I do. And it helped get me through a really tough time. And it was easier to get it published than it was printing it off every month at Staples for myself, because I use it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then so when I got the publishing deal, I was like, this is awesome, because I get to share it with everybody, because like I have stacks that I've just used for myself.
Yeah.
Like, so it's real. And I signed over all the royalties and rights to the Warriors Purpose Foundation, which is DDP's charity. And because I didn't care about really making a dime off it, I was just so happy that it's out there.
Yeah.
And happy that I can get copies too instead of spending $80-$100 to get it printed to use, because those worksheets are very, very helpful.
Saves money too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're fluent in Spanish?
Yes.
What's your favorite Spanish saying that's radio friendly?
Well, it's different because every country has their own little dialect or phrases, and you use one in one country, even though they're like two countries over and they're only the size of states. You would act like they're from like China and Australia, not understanding.
Yeah.
So words that you would say or would mean something different in let's say Colombia, you say something. Oh man, that's friendly. Just any words, it'll mean something different in the other neighboring countries. But my favorite's always like the greeting from Colombians, because they're very like loving and they're like, and it's different. Predominantly what I'm used to here in Arizona or even in Mexico is like, "Hey, ¿qué pasó?"
Yeah.
¿Qué tal? Well, like in Colombia, it's, "Hey, ¿qué más pues?" They put pues at the end of everything. But it's just like, it's just a friendly, funny greeting that when you're there, you'll be native. Because when you see somebody, "Hey, ¿qué más pues?" And then they'll like greet you and hug you and like take you into their culture. So opposite of what we're used to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that place.
I've heard you speak very fondly of Hispanic culture. And
yeah. Love it.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You keep talking about him, but what was your journey with DDP yoga and with just Diamond Dallas Page in general?
Well, it's funny because in 2017, early 2017, I had went to Laurel Ridge, which is a residential treatment center in Texas. I was active duty Green Beret, and I had, I finally agreed to go get some counseling or therapy, because I've had brain injuries, but PTSD, I was like totally, it's a nasty, ugly word. I'm like, that's not me. I knew what I signed up for. And then they're like, just try this. They're like, okay, you have the brain injuries, but you may have symptoms of PTSD. I'm like, no, I'm just angry all the time or this. They're like, those are symptoms. And they handed me this pamphlet, and it had like 20 like symptoms and, behaviors as a result of PTSD, but I didn't see that. I'm like, I have about 16 of these. I was like, I'll go if they help me with this. And I turned the page over, or the one prior to that, and said, hey, symptoms of PTSD. And I was like, that's what it is? And so, like, I always pictured it like hallucinating, or like what Hollywood kind of makes it. So that's why it's so stigmatic, because we don't hallucinate like that unless we're on some type of psychedelics. That's the only time I've seen people like hallucinate, but like a flashback isn't like what they see like on TV. And it could be for some, but for other people that I served with and still work with today, it's not. So getting educated on that was pretty good for me. And I did that at Laurel Ridge. And while I was there, they kind of get you on a circadian rhythm. Like, hey, you're waking up at 6:30 and you're going to go to bed by like 2200, 10 p.m. earlier. And you're in the meantime, in between that, you're not going to isolate. You're going to be doing classes, you're going to be doing activities, you're going to be eating, just learning, and then also doing your counseling and stuff. So it was really good, and you don't get to really choose what you get to do. So it sucked. So you kind of got to like, I have this ego as a Green Beret. I'm like, I can do whatever. And they're like, no, you're going to do yoga. And I was like, can I go do art or something, or just sit and draw or journal? They're like, no, you need to do yoga. It's on the schedule. And I was like, oh. I was like, well, I need a good stretch anyways. So I went to that class and fell in love with it. It was the first time I'd been out of my head during that whole session for, months. So it felt euphoric. And I was talking with my kids, and I'm a huge pro wrestling fan and would have pro wrestling parties with my kids. I told them, I was like, when Daddy gets home, we're doing yoga, but we're going to do DDP yoga, because, I was familiar with it. And I was like, if we're going to do it, I'm at least going to do it to a pro wrestler. Mm-hmm. So that was 2016, one of those 2 years, 2016, 2017. And then I started doing DDP yoga. I had some bootleg DVDs that I'd got, and would do them with the kids occasionally. But I was trying to get everybody at the Special Forces or 7th Group, like in my unit. I'm like, hey guys, you should do some DDP yoga. And fast forward like 3 or 4 years later, one of those guys who was one of the team sergeants messaged me and was like, hey, I can't believe you're working for Dallas. He goes, I remember when you were trying to get everybody to do DDP. But I just started doing DDP yoga because it made me feel great back then. I didn't know it was going to turn into me like meeting him and him training me himself, and then kind of creating the Warriors Purpose program. But I'd always looked up to Dallas because he had the story. He's the oldest wrestler to start at 35. So after doing the ASU thing, I was like, I'd wrote Dallas in 2019, said, hey, I'm going to graduate in a year or so, and then I'm going to hit the indies and do all this stuff and be just like you. And sure enough, that happened. And he brought me down to do the DDP yoga and simultaneously work with AEW because his production crew was filming for them at the time. So it was like, hey, work really hard, train at the Nightmare Factory, put in the work, do what you're doing. And, what better people to have on your side,
Would you agree that pro wrestling is very family oriented?
It depends on, I guess, the eye of the beholder, because I think it's just like going to any event where you can take your family, you can buy merch, eat food. Storylines and stuff can be a little bit, depending on even what religion you are, can kind of be taboo or raunchy or any of that other stuff. It didn't really make a difference for me because I'm not like so easily influenced or like some people are, but for some that are like sheep, it can be because they'll just listen to whatever they say or whatever they see and think it's truth in reality. But that's also the beauty of it too, is like, fooling the audience or getting them involved, like as if they're a part of the show and all that other stuff. So I guess it's just how you define it, I guess. But I always think it's a great time for the family. My family never really was into it. I always had the wrestling parties.
Yeah.
Because I grew up and they had the Nitro parties and that you would see on Monday Nitro at the time. People would send in VHS tapes of them having their own Monday Nitro parties. And I always thought that was so cool. Didn't have money or anything like that to do that. So when I became an adult, I did it all the time. And my kids would participate because I would have pin the wristband on Cena. We would decorate cakes, cupcakes, and stuff like that. I'd have the wrestling toys, but thinking that they would get into it, and they never did. They never did. Even still to this day, like all of them, all 7 just could. They kind of like, oh yeah, wrestling, but they're not like how I am, like, DVR in it,
yeah,
watching all of it, and then going to indie shows.
Super fan.
Yeah, huge mark.
You tagged with Doc Gallows one time.
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
Man, he was really pivotal in my early wrestling career because he was really close with a buddy of mine from Collar and Elbow. He owned Collar and Elbow, and he introduced me to Gallows, and it was surreal at first. It was like, man. And then it was just like, hey, come down to this, or let's do this, let's collab to that. And it all started at Talk and Shop. So they had their own podcast called Talk and Shop Podcast. And it was during the pandemic because they just got released from the WWE and they're, heartbroken. That was like, their career and everything. So what are you going to do? Everything's, locked down. So they decided to create their own pay-per-view with all their buddies from the wrestling business. So Collar and Elbow was going to go down there because they were sponsoring it. They were a sponsor for the pay-per-view. And I was on the road a lot with Collar and Elbow and Al Snow. So I just went down there to kind of get in where I fit in. Like if it's hold a camera, hold a light, set up the ring, whatever. And I remember just showing up to his ginormous house and, Heath Slater was out there. And Chavo. just hanging out. I was like, what? Everybody's just like so super close and just so different for what I was used to seeing, because I would go to WrestleCons and everything. So it was just like, this was the ultimate WrestleCon.
Yeah.
And then Rod, who owns Collar Elbow, put me over to him, and Chavo was like, you wrestle for ASU? You're so he like, and because he's a legit wrestler too, like grappler.
Mm-hmm.
And so he kind of took care of me that night. So we went in there because everybody was having some fun, drinking a little bit. And so not knowing who someone is that just walks in their house, like everyone's like, who are you? How, like, this invite, and Chavo was like, hey, leave him alone. Like, he's an ASU guy. He's with Collar and Elbow. He's my guy. And then everybody just kind of was like, oh, hey, how are you? It was it was one of the coolest moments. And but that was my first meeting with Luke, was Gallows. He was that. He was just like, what are you doing in my house? Who are you? And this and that. It was crazy. And right after that, though, the next day, they put me in their battle royal, the gimmick battle royal. And so it was like, hey, now it's on. And then from there, we would just come up with ideas, make funny vignettes, because we both lived in Georgia. We were bored and also still trying to stay relevant and get over. So teaming up with him, he was awesome. If there was a show, he would put it on. We'd go down there. Like I said, I got to tag with him. But the best guy, like he would let me and my kids stay there all the time, like just to come down, hang out, show the kids a good time, and just a real good brother.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, they're hard to come by like that, but he's definitely one of them.
That's nice. As we wrap up our 8th episode of Wrestlezona on 88.7 The Pulse, I'm Lance Reese, joined in studio with Roman Rozell. And Roman, I have one last question to make. Thank you for the support. What does that mean? That little autograph you wrote for me back in February 2020.
Well, you didn't understand it? Well, it was,
I understood it.
For me, like, I was living my dream of like being a pro wrestler and signing autographs, because just a year prior to that, I was at WrestleCons and doing the same thing. So like knowing that I could have like a fan base like supporting me, it was surreal, because I wasn't getting paid, and like I said, I was buying my own stuff to create my own merch. I was putting so much into this that it was like having like little fans and people support me was like getting paid.
Yeah.
And so people that, are jobless, they don't get paid. For in the wrestling business, sometimes like if you don't have someone coming up there, like even, wanting to meet you or anything like that, like it just goes a long way, is I guess what I could say. It makes you want to keep putting in the effort and drive those long hours and just keep doing what you're doing because you love it. So like having that type of support like means the world.
Do you have an unspoken message of yours you'd like to get across to the youth?
Yeah, don't self-select out. A lot of people, mental health is really huge, but when I say don't self-select out, it comes from like when I was in the Special Forces course. A lot of guys will psych themselves out and quit, voluntary withdrawal, because they don't think they're doing good or they're not good enough, because the instructor's cadre are like just kind of assessing,
Mm-hmm.
And then they ruin their whole career. They could be a Green Beret, but they self-select it out. They're like, I'm not ready for this, or they'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned, like, let someone else tell you no, or let someone else tell you to quit. So like in life, suicide prevention is huge. And I take that term, like, don't self-select out. Like, things are bad, but they don't last, and yeah, they'll come again, but like build that resiliency, because like, again, it's a wave, up, down, up, down, up, down, and you can forge your own path, and you could turn something that was a crisis into something, the setback can be the setup for something good. And I've had a lot of people I look up to, take their lives, they self-selected out, and it was like, man, like, so don't self-select out. And because life is beautiful. Look at the Superstition Mountains.
Yeah.
They're beautiful.
Well, thank you, Roman, for coming on Wrestlezona. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it too. I know I talk a lot.
Well, that brings an end to episode 8 of Wrestlezona on 88.7 The Pulse. I'm Lance Reese. Do you have a favorite wrestling theme song that you'd like to hear on the next episode? Give me a DM at Wrestlezona on Instagram is where you can find me. And also tell me your favorite segment of the show and your favorite tidbit that you learned from Rome in this interview. Stay tuned next week to hear episode 9 of Wrestlezona on 88.7 The Pulse. We got some more exciting news from all the top promotions and an exclusive interview with someone very special that I'm looking forward to interviewing. I'm Lance Reese, and until next time...